What happens to a man when no one waits for him at home? When there's no hand reaching out for his, no voice softening the harsh edges of his existence? You've been told that independence is freedom, that solitude is strength. But is it? Or does the absence of feminine energy slowly hollow out a man's soul? Men who live alone aren't simply choosing peace. Many are silently drowning in the unbearable weight of their own unchecked chaos. Without the stabilizing force of a woman, a man risks drifting into nihilism, into stagnation, into a dangerous self-sufficiency that starves his capacity for love, responsibility, and growth. But society won't tell you that. Society praises the lone wolf, not realizing the price he pays in the quiet of his own mind. The real question isn't whether a man can live alone. The question is what kind of man he becomes when he does. What happens to a man when no one is watching, when there's no one to hold him accountable, no partner to confront his weakness, no voice to challenge his delusions? I'll tell you what happens. He stands at the edge of a psychological abyss, a place where he will either forge himself into something stronger or decay into something unrecognizable. And most men fall into the decay. They rot in silence, pretending they're free while they're quietly dying inside. Solitude is seductive. It whispers lies. It tells you that you're independent, that you answer to no one, that you're finally free from the burdens of responsibility. But here's the brutal truth. Most men are not strong enough to carry the weight of total freedom. Freedom without responsibility isn't liberation. It's chaos in disguise. It's a slow suicide wrapped in comfort. Because without responsibility, without someone depending on you, there's no urgent need to grow, no pressure to confront your worst habits, no call to refine your character. You become comfortable with mediocrity because no one's there to suffer the consequences of your stagnation. And so you trade meaning for pleasure. You trade purpose for ease. And over time, you start to rot. Not in ways that are immediately obvious, but in ways that eat at your soul. Your discipline fades. Your ambition weakens. You lose your sharpness. Your resilience dies. Do you think you're immune? Look around. The epidemic of men living alone, drowning in addictions to pornography, video games, endless entertainment, it's not accidental. It's the manifestation of isolation. The man who has no one depending on him no longer sees himself as part of a greater story. He becomes a king of nothing, a ruler of an empty kingdom, where the only subject is his ego and the only reward is self-indulgence. But it gets darker. Without relational friction, you lose the very things that make you human. When you're alone, there's no one to reflect your flaws back at you, no one to challenge your selfishness, no one to force you to develop empathy, patience, or self-control. You start believing your own lies. Your weaknesses hide beneath the surface, never exposed, never challenged, never conquered. And you call it peace. But it's not peace. It's decay disguised as tranquility. And yet, paradoxically, solitude holds immense potential. It is a forge. A man who dares to confront himself in solitude, who structures his days with discipline, who seeks truth relentlessly, who embraces voluntary responsibility, even when no one is watching, becomes something formidable. He becomes dangerous in the best possible way. Because he's not driven by impulse, he's not enslaved by comfort. He's mastered the art of delayed gratification. He's built himself into something resilient, capable of love, sacrifice, and leadership. But how many men do this? How many truly confront themselves in the mirror of solitude? Very few, because it's brutal, it demands honesty, it requires sacrifice. And most would rather sink quietly into the warm, numbing pool of distraction than face the terror of their own inadequacy. Ask yourself, are you building yourself into someone who can carry the weight of life? Or are you hiding from responsibility under the illusion of independence? Because every day you live without accountability, you edge closer to the slow, invisible death of your potential. You think freedom is the absence of responsibility. It's not. Freedom is earned. It's the reward for mastering responsibility. And a man who lives alone, who refuses to confront his weaknesses, who abandons the pursuit of responsibility, will find that his so-called freedom becomes his cage. Here's the cold, hard truth. The man who fears responsibility is already enslaved, but the man who embraces responsibility in solitude becomes unbreakable. And that is a man the world desperately needs. Have you ever asked yourself why some men choose to remain alone? Not because they prefer solitude, but because they fear the brutal mirror that relationships hold up to them? Because that's the truth. A relationship is not a refuge from suffering, it's a confrontation with it. And many men, when faced with that confrontation, retreat, not because they are strong, but because they are weak. When you're in a relationship, every flaw you carry, your selfishness, your impulsiveness, your laziness, is exposed. There's no place to hide. The woman beside you becomes a living, breathing reflection of your inadequacies. And that's terrifying, because it forces you to see what you'd rather ignore. It forces you to change, or it breaks you. Many men choose escape over transformation. They say, I don't need anyone, I'm fine on my own. But that's not independence, that's fear dressed up as pride. You see, true growth requires friction. It requires another person standing opposite you who refuses to accept your mediocrity. Someone who calls out your lies, who won't tolerate your complacency, who demands your best. That is the crucible where character is forged. But it's painful. It burns away your ego. And most men aren't willing to endure that fire because comfort is addictive. Solitude allows you to maintain the illusion that you are sufficient as you are, but you're not. No one is. You need confrontation. You need someone who challenges your values, your habits, your worldview. Without that, you stagnate. You rot slowly, pretending you're evolving when in fact you're simply evading the very process that could make you extraordinary. And let's be clear, this isn't about submission to another person's demands. It's about willingly placing yourself in a structure of responsibility. It's about the mutual refinement that only committed relationships can offer. When a man refuses that, he isn't protecting himself, he's abandoning the very process that would turn him into who he's meant to be. Consider this: why do monks, soldiers, and great leaders subject themselves to strict discipline, to external structures that demand sacrifice? Because they understand a universal truth. You cannot master yourself alone. Discipline requires pressure. Accountability requires observation. Growth requires feedback. And a committed partner is one of the most powerful sources of that feedback you will ever encounter. But most men don't want feedback. They want comfort. They want peace without struggle, love without sacrifice, intimacy without vulnerability. And that's impossible. Love is inherently sacrificial. It exposes you. It forces you to wrestle with your darkest impulses. And if you run from that, you run from life itself. What happens to a man who avoids this confrontation? He grows older but not wiser. He becomes set in his ways. His habits harden into chains. His emotional range narrows. His capacity for connection withers. And one day he wakes up isolated, not because the world abandoned him, but because he abandoned his own development long ago. But for the man who embraces the confrontation, for the man who faces the demands of relationship head on, a different path unfolds. He grows, he sharpens, he learns to listen, he learns to sacrifice, he learns to lead, and in doing so, he becomes deeply competent. Not just for himself, but for his family, his community, and the world. So here's the question you must answer. Are you hiding from growth behind the mask of solitude? Or are you willing to step into the uncomfortable, often painful process of becoming who you are capable of being? Because the man who refuses to be challenged by another will never truly challenge himself. And if you won't challenge yourself, you're already defeated. Here's the truth that should haunt you tonight. The greatest enemy of the modern man is not failure, it's comfort. And comfort has destroyed more potential than failure ever could. Why is it that so many men who live alone eventually lose touch with their own soul? Why does isolation, which promises freedom, so often end in emptiness? Because solitude unchecked becomes a breeding ground for delusion. You start believing that your way is always the right way. No one confronts you, no one challenges your habits, and so you drift into a silent decay. It's a slow death, barely noticeable, but relentless. The man who lives without a woman, without true partnership, often believes he's avoiding conflict, but in truth, he's avoiding accountability. Because a strong woman doesn't let you hide from yourself. She sees the weakness you try to mask with bravado. She sees the laziness behind your excuses. She sees the potential you're too afraid to fulfill, and she calls it out. That confrontation hurts, but it's necessary. You see, in isolation, you don't have to face your own incompetence. You can rationalize your failures. You can tell yourself you're fine the way you are, but deep down you know without someone holding up the mirror, your flaws multiply unchecked. Your anger grows sharper. Your addictions deepen. Your empathy fades. And slowly, the man you were supposed to become dies unrealized. You might call it peace, but it's decay. Now, consider the man who dares to face that confrontation. He allows a woman, a true partner, to stand beside him and say, "You can be better." And she means it. That's not an attack. That's a gift. She sees the man inside you that even you're too scared to meet. She forces you to discipline your chaos, to take responsibility, to master yourself, not for her, for you. Because if you cannot master yourself in front of another human being who loves you, how will you ever master yourself at all? How will you carry the weight of life's real challenges if you crumble under the weight of honest feedback? I've seen this over and over. Men who choose isolation eventually become slaves to their worst instincts. They become addicted to comfort, addicted to control, addicted to narratives that protect their fragile egos. But life isn't meant to be lived in the echo chamber of your own voice. You need tension. You need someone who pushes back, someone who won't let you settle for mediocrity. And that is what a strong, committed woman does. She doesn't destroy your freedom. She demands you rise to meet your own potential. Let me ask you this. What kind of man do you want to be? The man who lives in his own kingdom of delusion, free from criticism but empty of growth? Or the man who submits himself to the refining fire of partnership and emerges stronger, sharper, wiser? Because you cannot have both. You cannot avoid confrontation and expect growth. You cannot evade accountability and expect mastery. When a man lives alone for too long, he begins to lose his capacity for real connection. His emotions dull, his vision narrows, his ability to sacrifice withers. And eventually, when he does meet someone, he's no longer capable of building anything meaningful. Because meaningful relationships require practice. They require struggle. They require failure. And above all, they require humility. The humility to say, "I don't have all the answers. Teach me where I'm blind." That's the painful paradox. The very thing men fear, being exposed, is exactly what saves them. Because in being exposed, you are given the chance to confront your weakness, to correct your flaws, to sharpen your character. That's the path to strength, not comfort, not isolation, confrontation, discipline, sacrifice. Here's your choice. Live comfortably weak or painfully strong. But remember this, comfort lies, growth hurts, and only one of them will save your soul. What happens to a man when he stops risking love entirely, when he no longer opens his heart to connection, to vulnerability, to responsibility? He thinks he's protecting himself, but in truth, he's slowly building a prison from which escape becomes almost impossible. And the bars of that prison are not forged by the world. They are forged by his own fear. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of failure. He tells himself he's strong because he's independent. He's disciplined because he's detached. But it's a lie, dressed as wisdom. Because the man who refuses to love is not strong. He is terrified. He is fragile. And he is alone. Not because he's superior, but because he's unwilling to face the terrifying demands that real intimacy requires. Love is dangerous. It exposes your weaknesses. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you would much rather keep hidden. Your pride, your selfishness, your immaturity. In love, you are seen fully. And being fully seen means you are fully judged. Not always harshly, but always truthfully. And that truth cuts deeper than any sword. But in that very exposure lies your salvation, because when you are seen, truly seen, you are given the opportunity to become more than what you are. That is the price of love, self-confrontation. Now, contrast that to the man who runs. The man who says, I don't need anyone. At first, it feels empowering, no one to answer to, no one to disappoint, no one to leave him, but slowly, his world shrinks. His emotions flatten. His ambitions decay. Because human beings are not designed to thrive in isolation. The brain itself, neurologically, is wired for connection. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, they are not merely individual chemicals. They are social currencies. They reward bonding, sacrifice, commitment. Without those relational experiences, the very chemical architecture of your brain begins to atrophy. You lose your resilience. You lose your ability to experience deep meaning. And eventually, you lose your capacity to love at all. And make no mistake, when you lose your capacity to love, you lose your capacity to live fully. You may exist, you may function, but you will not thrive, you will not grow, you will not transcend the limitations of your solitary mind because you've chosen safety over transformation. And transformation is always relational. Always. I've seen countless men walk this path. They become bitter, cynical, detached. They mistake their emotional numbness for strength. But true strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the mastery of feeling. It is the courage to feel pain, to face conflict, to endure disappointment, and to keep loving anyway. That is the hardest thing a man can do. That is what separates the coward from the hero. The coward hides behind his independence. The hero walks into the fire of relationship knowing full well that he may be burned. But he does it because he understands that only through fire is gold purified. Do you want to know why some men die alone, not just physically, but spiritually? Because they refuse to submit to the discipline of love. Love disciplines you. It demands accountability. It demands sacrifice. It demands growth. And for many men, that cost feels too high. So they choose comfort. They choose control. But control without connection is the fastest path to spiritual death. Ask yourself, what kind of man do you want to be? The man who guards his fragile ego with walls so high that no one can reach him, or the man who risks everything to become someone worthy of love? Because I'll tell you this truth, and you won't like it. The man who never risks his heart guarantees its destruction. Have you ever asked yourself what it truly costs to live a lie in a relationship? Not in the shallow sense, not merely cheating or hiding some trivial fact, but living every day unwilling to confront the deepest, most uncomfortable truths about who you are, who your partner is, and where your relationship stands. You think you're keeping the peace, but you're planting seeds of chaos, and sooner or later those seeds will grow into monsters that will devour you both. The lie feels safer in the moment, it always does, but safety bought with self-deception is nothing but delayed destruction. Weak relationships aren't built in one catastrophic moment. They're built one small compromise at a time, one unspoken frustration, one avoided conversation, one rationalization after another. And every time you choose comfort over truth, you weaken not only the relationship, but your own soul. You become a man who fears his own honesty. You become a man who trades integrity for approval. And you convince yourself you're being kind. You're not. You're being a coward. And cowardice, disguised as compassion, is one of the most destructive forces in intimate relationships. Now let's confront something even darker. The longer you live like this, the more you start to resent the very person you're trying to protect. You see, when you refuse to speak your truth, your unmet needs don't disappear. They ferment. They turn toxic. And that toxicity leaks into every interaction through passive aggression, withdrawal, criticism, contempt. And suddenly, the person you once loved becomes the person you blame for your own silence. But they didn't silence you. You silenced yourself. And now, both of you are paying the price for it. Contrast that to the courage of brutal honesty. Not cruelty, honesty. There is a difference. Brutal honesty is not about tearing the other person down It's about standing up for what's true, even when it terrifies you. It's about looking your partner in the eye and saying, "This isn't working, and I refuse to pretend any longer." That kind of honesty can break a weak relationship, but it can also transform a strong one. Because only when everything false is burned away can something real emerge from the ashes. Look around you. How many people are trapped in polite, dead relationships because neither person dares to tell the truth? How many marriages are nothing more than carefully choreographed performances where both partners are quietly dying inside? That's not love. That's mutual imprisonment. And we justify it by telling ourselves that confrontation would be too painful, that honesty would be too destructive. No, what's truly destructive is years of quiet misery, of unspoken resentment, of lives unlived because neither person had the courage to face reality. The great paradox is this: the path to the strongest, most fulfilling relationship is paved with conversations you're terrified to have. You want intimacy, then you must earn it. And you earn it by bleeding in the arena of truth. You stand exposed. You accept judgment. You admit your flaws. And you demand the same in return. Only then can you build something that can weather the storms of life. A man who cannot confront his partner cannot lead, cannot love, cannot grow. He is a prisoner of his own fear, and he will drag both himself and his partner into quiet despair. But the man who dares to speak his truth, even when his voice shakes, even when his heart pounds, becomes unbreakable, because he knows that the only love worth having is built on reality, not illusion. So ask yourself one final question: would you rather lose your comfort or lose your soul? Because every day you remain silent, you are making that choice. And make no mistake, the man who chooses comfort over truth doesn't keep his relationship alive, he simply delays its death.